It occurred to them that they would kidnap a child. They saw a mother with a little child. Also, hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. Well, logically, can a small child, be a serial killer? I wondered about that myself. I mean, until I picked up this book, I just hadn't thought about it. Sometimes the inspiration for our episodes comes from books. This is a book called 287 Strangest Facts About Serial Killers. We've already covered this author before, and that was also about serial killers, the great book of serial killers. We've already done an episode about a killer based on this book before. Today is similar. That was the inspiration. We wondered if it was even possible. As it turns out, after reading this book, it is simply possible. Those who deal with criminology have different opinions. A serial killer is someone who has committed at least 3 crimes in relatively short intervals, or sometimes longer ones. Others say that just 2 crimes are enough for that. Unfortunately, we've also had several cases in Poland where children have killed. The most shocking ones, for example, the one from recent weeks, because we also did an episode about that boy who killed his friend. A 14-year-old boy killed his 13-year-old friend, then he staged her death. It was made to look like she had committed suicide. It was a whole scheme, planned out. After all, he was only arrested after a year, so this wasn't some emotional, impulsive act, especially since that boy was functioning normally. He was there, he talked to people. No, nobody would have suspected him of having committed such a crime before. As for serial killers, well, we had the Beast of Sulikov. We also did an episode about that. Dawid, the youngest rapist and murderer in the history of Poland. A 14-year-old who killed and raped a schoolmate, a 13-year-old girl. He was sent to a juvenile detention center. Basically, during that whole time, he didn't improve because when he escaped or got out of that juvenile detention center, he attacked women again. Finally, when he was 29 years old, he killed 18-year-old Magda. It was pure coincidence. Magda's scooter just broke down. Something came over him, as he said. He also killed Magda many years later. We have many such cases. Another one, I could list plenty of them here, is the case where a 12-year-old girl in Jelenia Gora killed her friend who was a year younger. There is, I would say, a lot of this, unfortunately. However, can children also be classic serial killers? Well, listen to today's episode. Northern India, 2006, so not that long ago. A family, just a simple family. The father is a laborer. The mother basically stays at home. They also have a small piece of land and a few children. In this family, there's Amariet. Yes, Amariet is the boy's name. He was at the age when most children think about typical childish games. He recently turned 7 years old. So theoretically, he should be thinking about some new toy, about running around with boys, with friends in the yard, things like that. And Amariet was a loner. Everyone said he usually kept to himself somewhere, off by himself. He didn't have any friends. Probably also because he was just aggressive since he was a child. His parents knew that something was going on with him, but they were simple people. They probably just didn't know how to help him. In that year, 2006, his aunt Marietta, his mother's sister, was moving from one city to another to the very city where they lived. She asked if she could leave her 6-month-old daughter, the boy's cousin, with them. She was busy moving her luggage somewhere, so she left the child with them. During that time, when the boy's mother went to the market to do some shopping, he was supposed to take care of the little girl. However, when the mother came back from shopping, she saw that the child was gone. She asked her son, the 7-year-old, if he knew what happened to his cousin, what happened to the 6-month-old girl. And then he said, without any emotion or hesitation, that he killed her and took the body outside behind the house and covered it with branches. Well, it was a shock because the mother went and actually found the girl's body, brought it home. They didn't know what to do. He acted as if nothing had happened. He had no remorse at all. And he said he killed her because he liked the way she screamed, the way he caused her pain, the way he pinched her. At some point, he simply put his hands around her neck, and that's how the boy strangled his cousin. The parents also didn't know what to do in this situation. This was in India, and it was the death of a cousin. They simply hid everything. She told her cousin, her sister, that it was an accident, a misfortune, that this is why the child died, and well, there was no investigation, no inquiry. The police didn't get involved in any of this. It was basically accepted as a fact. I guess in India that's just possible for something like a family matter. And Amariet was severely beaten or hit by his father, and that was the only punishment. But only a few months have passed, not even a year. This time it was about the 8-month-old sister of that boy. He simply sneaked up to her at night, and just like with his cousin a few months earlier, he strangled her too. As he said, he liked that the child cried, that the child gasped for air when he was strangling her. That's typical sadistic behavior. The mother woke up in the morning, saw her daughter, that little one, and realized she was dead. She asked her son if he did it, if he did something to his sister, and again, just like before, he uncritically said yes, that he killed her. Again, in this case, there was no investigation, there were no proceedings. Of course, people in the village started talking, saying that with a second case in such a short time, something strange was going on in that house. There were also some rumors that the boy, who was already 8 years old at that time, could have been involved in it. But in fact, no one really believed that such a small boy could have had a part in the deaths of those 2 girls. So this little Amariet, already at the age of 8, had, so to speak, 2 murders to his name. But again, a few months go by. There, in that town, there's a primary school, but at the same time, in that school, there's kind of a daycare, a preschool, where you can leave your children. And in fact, one of the neighbors of the Sado family left her infant, her little girl, in that nursery. When the mother came to pick her up, well, she found that the child was gone. The staff started searching. Everyone was shocked because, after all, such a baby couldn't have gone anywhere on its own. And obviously someone took her. The search began. The staff were looking. People from the town were looking. Of course, the girl's parents were searching too, but with no result. They couldn't find her anywhere. That's when people started saying that maybe little Sadie was behind the disappearance. People went to the police. They notified the police. They also shared their observations and suspicions that it was that little boy. Well, at first the police didn't want to hear about it at all. Well, they said, this boy is 8 years old. It's impossible for him to sneak into the nursery, take a child, and do something to him. So at first they didn't want to intervene at all, but then people started insisting and some protests began. The police officers first started talking to the parents. At first the parents denied it, saying it was impossible for him to do anything, but then they actually broke down. They said yes, they suspected their son might have done something to that little girl because supposedly he had previously killed both his cousin and his own sister. Little Amariet disappeared and went into hiding, but being a child that age, he did not hide very well, so he was easy to find. He just hid somewhere behind some building. The police officers pulled him out, brought him in, and asked him, probably not really believing it themselves if he knew what had happened to that little girl. And he, well, again, just directly without any evasion, he said yes, that he simply killed her, that first he strangled her, and then he took a piece of brick and started hitting her with that brick. When he realized that the child was dead, he took her from the crib, carried her to the forest, dug a shallow grave there, covered her with leaves, and simply went back home. When they started looking for him, he hid so that no one would find him. The police officers, not quite believing him, asked him to go with them to show them the place, and indeed the little girl was in that grave. And then, during the interrogation with a psychologist present, he explained everything in detail, step by step. What he liked was that when he strangles that little girl, she gasps for air, and he has a certain power over her. Well, such a sadist, as I said before, spoke about it without any emotion, without any empathy, as if he was telling his parents something insignificant. He was more interested, as the police officers who interrogated him said, in getting another cookie because he liked those cookies, and in exchange for another cookie, he would tell them something more. Of course, this story quickly spread all over the world. Psychologists wondered how it was possible that such a kid could kill in this way, in such a sadistic manner. It became a problem because, of course, how do you punish him? Practically, he couldn't be punished. He ended up in a kind of educational center, a children's home, sort of like a juvenile detention center. He was a threat there too. While he was in that center, he was practically always in isolation because everyone was afraid he would just kill another child, but they couldn't keep him there forever. He stayed there until he turned 18. Then the state changed his last name because people wanted to lynch him, people were looking for him, and the media was searching for him. His last name was changed, and then he disappeared somewhere. He's somewhere out there. Today he's 28 years old, I would say, just 28, and unfortunately he could be anywhere. Graham Young was born in England in 1947. His life started, I would say, tragically because when he was just 14 weeks old, his mother died. He also had an older sister. The father couldn't really manage raising them. Because of that, he gave Graham to his own sister to raise, while the older sister was put under the care of their grandparents. Well, just over a dozen years later, when Graham was 13, his father met a new partner, Molly. She agreed to take the children back to him, and they started to form a family. It was basically the father, his two children from his previous marriage, and the stepmother, Molly. For almost 13 years, Graham was raised by his aunt and uncle, and it must be said that from a very young age, he was fascinated by various kinds of poisons. He was so passionate about it that he read all kinds of textbooks. When he was 12 or 13 years old, these were not children's books. These weren't, let's say, for children. These were textbooks. She was purely interested in toxicology. He was interested in the occult. He was interested in black magic. And really, being only 13 years old, he had enormous knowledge, to the extent that when he started living with his father again, he went to the local pharmacist. This man was also a chemist, and he got into a discussion with him about different kinds of poisons. And this pharmacist, an experienced man, a pharmacist, well, he said that this boy couldn't possibly be just 13 years old, that he was much older, and his knowledge about different kinds of poisons was enormous. Graham so thoroughly convinced this pharmacist that he was some kind of researcher that the pharmacist sold him large amounts of antimony, which is a poisonous, harmful, toxic substance. And from that moment on, practically everyone in his family started getting sick. Most of all, his stepmother, Molly, who started having, well, indigestion, stomach pains, dizziness, some paralysis. Just strange things were happening to her. It was similar with his father. He was in slightly better condition, but he also had some health problems. The same happened to his sister, as well as two of his school friends and a female friend. Molly's stepmother starts getting sick. She's in such a condition that she can hardly move. In the meantime, she even gets into a car accident. Some car just hit her. She starts getting sick in 61, and at the beginning of 62, the stepmother dies. Well, these strange things happening in his family, like the fact that practically everyone is getting sick, also caught the attention of the aunt who was raising Greya Grahama. She knew that he was fascinated by all kinds of poisons. She knew that he had enormous knowledge about them. And so she and the uncle started to wonder if maybe the father's condition, the stepmother's death, and the sister's illness were not just coincidences. That Graham simply had a hand in it somehow, that he was behind the fact that the whole family was practically feeling unwell. They reported this. First they went to the school principal. The school principal did indeed find various kinds of poisons in the locker, antimony, thallium, a lot of substances that could have caused the death of at least several dozen people. The police were also notified. He was detained. He admitted that he poisoned his stepmother, that he poisoned his father, that he poisoned his sister, and that he poisoned a classmate at school. As he said, he treated them like guinea pigs. There were no emotions in him, no remorse. So he was only 14 years old then when he started poisoning. He was 13, and he ended up in a psychiatric institution. He was the youngest patient in the history of that institution. When he ended up here again with the patients and staff, he shared his expertise about different kinds of poisons, and they were simply afraid of him. Yes, the staff was afraid of him. The patients were afraid of him because they saw that he was, to put it mildly, obsessed with all sorts of things used for killing. At the beginning, when he arrived at that psychiatric hospital, one of the patients died. There wasn't any direct evidence, but everyone suspected that Graham was behind it. They also found cyanide in the teacup of one of the nurses. How did cyanide end up on the premises of the facility? And here, this guy's vast knowledge came into play because they asked him, well, there's cyanide. Where could this cyanide have come from? And he replied that it's a very simple method. You can just find it in the area around the psychiatric hospital. There are laurels growing there, a certain variety, not bay leaves, fortunately, the ones we add to soup, but laurels from which you can easily extract cyanide using a simple chemical reaction. Well, there was a lot of this plant around the hospital, so of course everyone was terrified of him, watching him to see if he was going out somewhere and bringing that plant back. He was once again somewhat isolated in that facility because, well, no one knew what to expect from him. A few years later, when Graham is 18 years old, he files a request to be released from that psychiatric facility. He claimed that he was already cured and didn't pose a threat to anyone. There must have been a conversation with his father and his sister, and they got scared because they were simply afraid of him. They knew that if he got out, their lives could be in danger. Therefore, his request to be released from the psychiatric facility was denied. But a few years later, exactly 5 years later, the chief psychologist, the psychiatrist of that facility, gave such recommendations to the Minister of Internal Affairs, stating that Graham was already cured and that he was not a threat to anyone. And it sounds quite bizarre, but he no longer has any mischief on his mind. Well, it seems that poisoning people, killing, calling it mischief seems a bit strange. Nevertheless, the Minister of Internal Affairs actually agreed to this and decided that Graham could leave the psychiatric facility and start a new life outside its walls. And that's exactly what happened. Graham gets a job at a store, and this place also produces infrared lenses with thallium bromide. Well, of course, thallium is also a poisonous substance that causes paralysis and, if the doses are high, eventually death. Graham quickly realized that he once again had access to poison. As soon as he started working in that shop, in that factory, he began his new activities. Unfortunately, there was no information anywhere that he had been in a psychiatric institution, that he was interested in poisons, or that he had been suspected of causing people's deaths simply by poisoning them. So his new colleagues from that shop, from that factory, accepted him without question. Besides, he was very pleasant. In the afternoons, he would invite them for a traditional English afternoon tea. But they didn't know that there were poisonous substances in that tea. The warehouse manager, Bob, was the first to be targeted. He felt bad. He had some paralysis in his limbs. His hair was falling out. The doctors didn't know what it was. It clearly pointed to poisoning, but they also suspected that maybe he was poisoned because the factory produces this equipment. It was incredible. He went on sick leave. Then another employee, his deputy, started feeling bad, and so on, one after another. That manager, Bob, did come back to work for a short while, but one day he received a massive dose of thallium and died. The employees who were with Graham also started to suspect him. On one hand, they knew he was friendly. When the manager got sick, he visited him in the hospital, showed concern, and asked how he could help. On the other hand, they were concerned that he kept talking about poisons, about how he could create and produce such poisons. These employees simply notified the police. The police checked his records, and it turned out that it's possible he was simply poisoning all those people. They searched his house and again found a lot of different kinds of poisons, antimony and thallium, and those were the substances they found most of. They took him in for questioning, and he admitted that he had also poisoned his co-workers and that he poisoned the manager. When they asked him why, he said that he stopped seeing them as colleagues or partners and only saw them as guinea pigs. He admitted to those other murders and even boasted that he killed his stepmother in such a perfect way because he used thallium, which is odorless and tasteless. Because of that, he committed what he called the perfect murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, sent to prison, and in prison just like before. At home, just like in the psychiatric hospital, he talked about poisons. He talked about how you can make them from anything that's around you. Just like in the psychiatric hospital, people were simply afraid of him even in prison. The guards were afraid of him. Other inmates were afraid of him because they didn't know what was going on in his head. Again, he spent a lot of time somewhere in isolation, in seclusion, because nobody knew what he was up to this time. He died in 1990. I would say he died under suspicious circumstances. To be honest, no one really knew why he died. Theoretically, it was something related to his heart, but it's suspected that the prisoners were so afraid of him that they simply poisoned him. Maybe it was because of the situations he managed to create in those prison conditions. He was cremated very quickly, and just 2 weeks later, on September 2nd, his ashes were scattered on the beach. Of course, for us, the story from Jelenia Góra was shocking when that 12-year-old girl killed her friend who was a year younger. Such stories have happened in the past. Probably the most well-known story in the world happened in 1993 in Walton, United Kingdom. Two boys, Robert and John, were only 10 years old. That day, February 15th, they simply skipped school. They got the idea to kidnap a child. They saw a mother with a small child. As it turned out, that little boy, James, was only 2 years old. Well, a series of what I would call unfortunate events. James's mom simply went to the store that day, to the shopping mall, together with her cousin. She was basically on her way home when she remembered she hadn't bought any meat. So she went back and said goodbye to her cousin. She went back and simply stood in line, holding James's hand. He was the apple of her eye. She had miscarried before, so she looked at him with special care, that's all. It was literally just a moment because she took out her wallet and paid. She wanted to take the child by the hand again, but James was already gone. John and Robert were watching her the whole time. As soon as they saw that she let go of the boy's hand, they simply walked up, took the little boy, and left the gallery with him. And so they walked through the city. Two 10-year-olds leading a 2-year-old walked through the city for almost 2 hours. A lot of people saw them. Some people were a bit surprised. One lady asked where they were going, so they told her that it was their little brother crying and they were taking him home. They told another lady that the child was lost and they were taking him to the police station. After 2 hours, they went near the local railway tracks and started to torture the 2-year-old boy in a cruel way. These are tortures that are basically indescribable, like putting batteries in his mouth, pushing some kind of paint into his eye, and finally, they took a metal rod. They started beating him with that metal rod. From the broken bones on his head alone, there were about 40 of those wounds, 40 blows with that metal rod. When they killed him, they realized he was dead. They put him on the railroad tracks, trying to make it look like an accident. Then the police caught them pretty quickly. They also didn't suspect that two 10-year-olds would be capable of such a gruesome murder, but they were caught. The sentence is, of course, similar to what it would be in Poland. They were in a juvenile detention center. After years, they got out. John kept coming back because they always left some materials with him about violence against children. So it looks like that rehabilitation just didn't help him. Those images are still stuck in his head. Even this year, in January 2026, he wrote a request to be released from prison, so far without success. However, Robert changed his last name. John did too, but Robert changed his last name. They are somewhere out there. No, there hasn't been any news about him. Maybe the rehabilitation actually helped him. It's like this. In England, there's a law that people like that have their last names changed. You can't publish those names because anyone who publishes their new names also faces prison. So in that sense, they're somehow immune. But you can see from this that, at least in the case of this one, this John, those childhood images caused him to remain a criminal for life. This type of murder where children kill children. And I would say there are quite a few of these in the history of criminology. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that such cases also happen in Poland. It's simply a matter of probability. But every time, of course, it frightens all of us. There are their stories, for example, because we've talked about boys here, but it also happens that there are girls. For example, the story of Mary Bell, an 11-year-old girl who killed two boys, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So such situations have also happened. And that's exactly something I would say was a subject of ongoing discussion. Today it's not. Usually we deal with other topics because there's the question of judging these kinds of children, minors. There was once an idea not to try them because of their age, because it might turn out that a 12-year-old or 13-year-old can be an experienced killer. They can commit such a calculated crime with premeditation and not be held accountable for it. Maybe each case should be considered and examined individually based on the idea that age doesn't matter. What matters is what he did and how he did it. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.